Does the president now acknowledge what the special counsel indictments made clear, which is that Russians not only tried to meddle but interfere and influence the 2016 election?
Absolutely, and the president has acknowledged that multiple times before. He acknowledged it during the transition, he acknowledged it during a press conference in Poland, and he acknowledged it for a third time at a press event in Poland. He has stated several times, I think one of the places where you guys seem to get very confused, and it seems to happen regularly, the president hasn't said that Russia didn't meddle. What he's saying is it didn't have an impact, and it certainly wasn't with help from the Trump campaign. It's very clear that Russia meddled in the election. It's also very clear that it didn't have an impact on the election, and it's also very clear that the Trump campaign didn't collude with the Russians in any way for this process to take place.
So if that's the case, why hasn't the president implemented the sanctions which Congress passed last year?
Look, frankly, that's not completely accurate. Look, this president's been tougher on Russia, far tougher on, well, there's a process that has to take place, and we're going through that process. That law also says that the countries have to violate something in order for those sanctions to go into place, and that hasn't necessarily happened. But what I can tell you, hold on, that the president has been extremely tough on Russia. He helped push through $700 billion to rebuild our military. I can assure you Russia is not excited about that. He's helped export energy to Eastern Europe. I can assure you Russia is not excited about that. He has put and upheld sanctions that the Obama administration put in place. He's upheld those. He's closed 3 diplomatic properties that were Russia's here in the United States. He has taken number of actions against Russia and put pressure on them. He's helped arm the Ukrainians. There are a number of places that Obama was too weak and refused to take and put pressure on Russia where this president has.
There are Democrats and Republicans.
I'm
They
gonna
said
keep
the
moving.
president
John,
could be much tougher. Why not?
Sorry, I'm
implement
sure
the
he'll pick up
sanctions
where you
now?
left off.
I'll pick up. First, a clarification from some of the president's tweets over the weekend. The president doesn't really think that the FBI failed to stop the Parkland shooter because it was too involved with the Russia investigation, does he?
I think he was speaking not necessarily that is the cause. I think we all have to be aware that the cause of this is that of a deranged individual that made a decision to take the lives of 17 other people. That is the responsibility of the shooter, certainly not the responsibility of anybody else.
So did he mistweet when he said that? 'Cause he's pretty direct. He says, this is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russia
I think he's
collusion.
making the point that we would like our FBI agencies to not be focused on something that is clearly a hoax in terms of investigating the Trump campaign and its involvement.
You just agree that the evidence is there that the
I
Russians
said that the
interfered with our
Trump
election.
campaign interfered and
But
colluded
this
with it.
investigation is obviously about what Russia did, and it raises the question now that you've said the president agrees, the national security advisor says the evidence is incontrovertible. What is the president going to do about it? What is he specifically doing about the fact that Russia interfered with our election and has every intention, we are told, of doing it again? What is he doing about it?
Look, just last week, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen met with a number of relevant stakeholders. They're discussing this process and going through and looking every single day at the best ways forward. Everybody wants to blame this on the Trump administration. Let's not forget that this happened under the Obama administration.
It happened over a year ago. What's he done about it?
We have spent a lot of time working on cybersecurity, focusing on protecting the fairness on our elections. And as I just said, the Department of Homeland Security met with state and local officials just over the last several weeks, along with election vendors to make sure that our election system is secure. Last week, they met with state and private officials on how best to secure the election system from foreign interference. We're not the only targets of foreign interference, and we're working with our allies on the daily basis to make sure that we're following best practices. This has been a topic of conversation with multiple foreign heads of state. President Trump and the administration have made it clear that interference in our elections will have consequences, and we're going to continue to impose consequences in response to Russian cyber attacks. Just last week, we called out Russia by name. It was one of the first times that you've seen something like that take place. We're going to continue doing things like that.
The president hasn't even criticized Vladimir Putin about this. He hasn't even called out Putin. He criticized Obama, he criticized the FBI. He didn't even criticize Vladimir Putin.
He has been tougher on Russia in the first year than Obama was in 8 years combined. He's imposed sanctions. He's taken away properties. He's rebuilt our military. He has done a number of things to put pressure on Russia and to be tough on Russia. Just last week, there was an incident that'll be reported in the coming days in another way that this president was tough on Russia.
Sarah? Thanks a lot, Sarah. In the aftermath of the indictment, which was handed down by Special Counsel Bob Mueller's office on Friday, the president tweeted quite a bit, and tweeted quite a bit over the weekend. He was critical of the FBI. He was critical of Democrats, critical of the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, even critical of his predecessor, but he was not critical of Russia. He was not critical of the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. I didn't get a sense of outrage in what the president put out there in his tweets, that he's angered that another country, Russia, tried to interfere in the U.S. presidential election, tried
He
to
actually
interfere
called
in our
out Russia
system.
by name in his official statement that went out shortly after those indictments came down. He called them bad actors and specifically called out Russia. It was the only individual in that statement. That was the first reaction of the president. So I would disagree with the premise of your question. He's also, again, been extremely tough on Russia in a number of different ways, and we're going to continue to do that.
Sorry, Sarah, is he angered by this or outraged by the fact that Russia tried to interfere in our system?
I think he's angered that anybody would try to meddle into our system. But again, I think it's important to remember that we are looking forward to on figuring out the best ways to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thanks, sir. If I could indulge you with 3 questions, we got a lot of housekeeping to do. First, you mentioned the president's supporter of background checks. The House passed bill includes concealed carry reciprocity. Is that a provision the president would consider after this tragedy?
I haven't spoken to him about that specific procedure. I know he spoke with Senator Cornyn on Friday. The Senate version is a little bit different, and he is generally supportive of that, but we're going to continue those conversations.
Separately, last week there was some news made by Administrator Pruitt as well as Secretary Shulkin. Do they both have the president's about their private travels and use of whether it be first-class flights or in the privy use of federal resources? Do both of them still have the confidence of the president?
I have no reason to believe otherwise. As we've said many times before, if somebody no longer has the confidence of the president, you guys will know.
And finally, the Chief of Staff on Friday issued that memo on security clearances, that those with interim security clearances by the end of this week that have been outstanding since June of last year would lose their access to classified information. One of those people we know from his attorney is Senior Advisor Jared Kushner. Can you talk about whether or not how he'll be able to do his very senior job in the White House if he does not have access to classified information?
I can tell you that no decision within the memo will impact anything that Jared Kushner is working on in terms of specifics on security clearance. I can't get into.
Does he not need classified information to do his job?
I can't answer whether someone has security clearance or not, as we've addressed many times before, but I can tell you that nothing that has taken place will affect the valuable work that Jared is doing. He continues and will continue to be a valued member of the team, and he'll continue to do the important work that he's been focused on with the last year. John.
Sarah, you mentioned a deranged individual took the lives of 17 people at Parkland. That's after a deranged individual took dozens of lives in Las Vegas, in the wake of which the president offered some support for the idea of banning bump stocks, which then seemed to have fallen by the wayside. It was preceded by a deranged individual snuffing out the lives of nearly an entire classroom at Sandy Hook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Other than supporting a bill that would encourage state and federal government agencies to do what they're supposed to do, does the president have any ideas at all on how to address this, or is he starting from scratch?
I can tell you that the president supports not having the use of bump stocks, and that we expect further action on that in the coming days. He ordered the Department of Justice and the ATF to review the regulation of bump stocks. My understanding is that review has been completed and movement will take place on that shortly. But the president, when it comes to that, is committed to ensuring that those devices are. Well, again, I'm not going to get ahead of the announcement, but I can tell you that the president doesn't support the use of those accessories.
And on the broader problem of deranged individuals getting hold of weapons, and killing people indiscriminately. Does he have any ideas on how to deal with this?
Well, look, we're having, again, that's part of a lot of the conversations that we're gonna have over the
Would
next.
suggest he started from scratch here.
On mental
If he
illness.
has to listen to a bunch of people,
No,
and he
he's-
doesn't have any ideas of his own, that would suggest that he doesn't have any ideas.
It's not what I said. You're taking my words out of context.
Could you explain
Well,
it?
I was trying to before you interrupted me. But the president is very focused on mental illness, working with the Health and Human Services Department to determine the best path forward on that and what is available and allowed under the law. Certainly something that we take very seriously and something that we want to address, and that we're working hand in hand with both the federal government as well as state and local law enforcement officials on what we legally can do. Unfortunately, we can't just flip a switch, but there is a process. We are a law and order country, and the president is trying to do everything that he can under his capacity to address these concerns, and certainly when it comes to mental illness.